is Matt, and Stephanie is also here from Educators for Equity. And today we have a special guest. We are here today with Dr. Carla Manning, and she is from the Equity Leadership Group. And she's going to be discussing today some really great things on how to authentically embrace diversity in your classroom. She has created a really nice framework for that to center on this topic, and it's called How to Build a Culturally Responsive Classroom. And she's going to break down that framework today. And if you're interested in more, just stay tuned, and soon she'll be providing us with even more content. But today she's just going to provide that framework to us and kind of center our focus for safe starts going back to school in some of us a couple weeks. So here's Carla Manning.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Matt. Thank you. And I'm very glad to be here with this group, with Educators for Equity. I love it. I love the mission, what you all are doing, and I am just very glad to work with you all and to support. So just a little bit about me before we dive into this week's topic. I am Dr. Carla Manning. I am a former educator in the Chicago public school system. I was teaching there for a few years. Now I live in New York. I work for the CUNY system where I teach undergraduate pre-service teachers. And then I'm also the owner and founder of the Equity Leadership Group, which is a consulting and coaching business that offers diversity, equity, and inclusion training to K-12 teachers and school principals. So I'm very glad to be here and to share my ideas and insight with you all. So we can just really go ahead and jump on in and get started. The audience for this week's lecture is primarily teachers. Of course, really anyone who works with students in any capacity within education can really benefit from this conversation. But I think that the ideal audience is primarily K-12 teachers, whether you are a general ed teacher, perhaps a special education teacher, a literacy coach, an ESL or bilingual teacher, whatever capacity of teaching you are working in. So how can we build a culturally responsive classroom? How can we really create an environment that is culturally responsive, that promotes equity, that values diversity, that embraces inclusion for all of our students? So I've created a framework for you to think about, for you to follow, and hopefully you can begin implementing some of these strategies to really help to go in that direction. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is classroom management. That is the first step in how to build a culturally responsive classroom, is to rethink your classroom management philosophies and practices. So why do I say rethink? I'm asking you to rethink because many of us who are teachers have really been trained to promote or to produce a classroom management environment that is punitive, that can be disciplinarian, that can even be authoritative. And these sort of philosophies with classroom management really create effects on children, on students that are anti-learning, that are anti-inclusive and anti-diversive. So I want you to think about classroom management in a way that is restorative. Restorative. What do I mean by restorative classroom management? Restorative classroom management is a framework of classroom management that invites you to think about how can you restore a child's presence, and how can you restore a classroom environment that is really safe and inclusive for all of the students. So let me give you an example. So say you have a student, and the student, is perhaps, name calling and, using language in the classroom that is offensive and that is disrespectful to everyone in the classroom. A traditional person may just say, okay, you know what, John, you need to leave. Okay, I'm not going to have this conversation with you. We're not going to accept this. You just need to go. You need to go to the principal's office. And I'm also writing you up for a 3-day suspension, okay? So we know that when students are consistently suspended, that ultimately that leads to what we call the school to prison pipeline, which can also really be another good conversation that we can have. So we can come back to that. But instead of suspending John, and instead of sending him out of the classroom we want to think about how can we restore his behavior and how can we restore the classroom so that everyone feels safe. Now, in this situation, I just may say, okay, well, John, you just may need a few minutes for a timeout. Let's go to either another part of the classroom or let's step out in the hallway. But with restorative, we want to say, how were other students impacted and affected by John's behavior? How did other students feel about his behavior? And what can John now do to, again, to restore this classroom safety so that students actually feel safe and feel warm enough to really talk to him again? So with restorative practices, and I'm specifically thinking of restorative circles, and it's kind of hard to verbalize it virtually. It's really good to really see this in action. But with the restorative circle, we can say all of us can come together and we can form our bodies in like a complete circle. And John can begin by saying why why he expressed himself using this particular language. Why did he choose to use vulgar language and expletives that offended people? What was going on in John's mind that led him to use that language? But we want John to say that. We want that student to take responsibility and to take ownership of what he did. And we want him to acknowledge that what he did was wrong. Okay, that's the first step in restorative practices. Another step with that, so after John has said that, then some of the other students can say, you know, John, when I heard those words, I felt X, Y, and Z. Okay, I felt that you did not appreciate me. I felt that you disrespected me. I did not feel valued. Okay, those are some of the examples of a restorative approach to classroom management, where we're not simply just suspending students for behavior that we think is quote unquote bad, but we are promoting them to take responsibility and to take accountability for what they did. And we also want them to acknowledge how their actions affected other people. And then some of the other students can say, okay, John, this is how you can come back into the classroom space. This is how we can create an environment where all of us can now feel respected and valued. So the first step in this framework is, again, classroom management, but classroom management with the restorative practice lens. A second way that we can create a culturally responsive classroom for this new school year is to build trust with our students. It's to build trust. In any relationship, trust is key, whether that is a personal relationship, whether that is a professional relationship, trust is key. And certainly the relationship between ourselves as teachers and students is no different from that. So as educators, we want to be very mindful of how we are creating community and how we are building trust. And we want to be authentic and intentional about that. We want to be intentional about building trust with our students. And I'm going to be intentional here. Specifically, if you are a teacher who is white and you are teaching Black and Latino students, that is key, because many of our students of color, particularly our Latino and Black students, they are seeing what's happening right now in the news, in social media. They are seeing acts of racism towards themselves as people of color. And naturally, some students of color are not going to just openly trust white people. That is a fact. It's not my opinion because I'm a Black woman. It's just a fact. Many students of color may have a difficult time and may have a challenging time with trusting white people, generally speaking, because they're going to see, they're going to say, you know what? When I see a white person on the news, they are arresting people who look like me. They are killing people who look like me. So I don't care if I'm a student and you're a teacher. Why should I trust you? Many of our students may raise these questions, and those are very valid questions. So as an educator, you want to be mindful of how you build trust with your students. So let me give you a couple of ways on how to build trust. Number one, one way is to simply have open and honest conversations with students. Have open and honest conversations with them, and do not avoid issues because you think it's over their head or you don't want to talk about it. Okay? Do not avoid sensitive and controversial issues simply because you don't know what to say or you don't want to quote unquote go there. Okay? I would not recommend that. I would recommend to have authentic conversations, open conversations. These conversations may promote vulnerability within you as an educator or with the student, and that's totally fine. We're human. It's okay to be vulnerable at times. That's okay. All right. Another way to build trust, and this is almost sort of basic, but it really needs to be said. Pronounce students' names correctly and know their names. That is one way just off top. Okay. If you have a student, I know some of our Latino friends may have a name, okay, and they just may say, okay, well, I want to be called this name for short. But let the student tell you that. Okay. If a student's name is Angelica, okay, I had a girlfriend growing up, her name was Angelica. You know, if she wants you to call her Angelica, call her Angelica. If she wants you to call her Angel for short or Angie, that's fine. But let her say that. As a teacher, don't just automatically give her a nickname or give her a short name because that's comfortable for you to pronounce. Okay, pronouncing students' names is a great way to show that you respect them, that you respect and value their humanity, and that helps to build trust. Another way to build trust, and this is something that I used to do as an educator, before the class begins, I would just stand outside of the door in between passing periods and greet the students as they come in. I would greet the students as they come in. I've seen some videos where teachers have like these, these handshakes, and they're outside for 5 or 10 minutes shaking the students' hands, you know. And hey, I didn't, I wasn't doing all of that, but I did shake their hands as they would come in. But however you want to do it, it's just a way to greet them as they come in, so that you are acknowledging their presence, you are acknowledging who they are as they come into the classroom, and it's just another way to create some physical trust and bonding with the students as they enter the classroom space. Okay, so yes, so good. So we have two ideas here. The first one on how to build a culturally responsive classroom management with the restorative lens. The second way is to build community and create trust in building that community with students. Let's talk about some actual teaching strategies as our third step. Let's talk about some actual teaching strategies. Now, a lot of teachers, and I've been seeing this on social media, where teachers are saying, oh, well, I have these diverse texts, I have these books, what should I do with these books? Okay. I would not recommend, what I would not recommend is to just create some sort of a bin or a space and label it, the diversity bin or the diversity book section or something like that. So one way, if you have a lot of diverse text, actually just make it a part of your regular classroom library. And if you're going to separate or categorize the books, categorize them perhaps by the genre of literature or by the authors alphabetically, but not necessarily like these are the Black books over here, these are books written by Puerto Rican authors. No, 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 no. Okay, if you're going to categorize the books, either just do so by the genre or by the author. Okay, but let's unpack some of these strategies. So one way to actually bring out the content of the book with the students is to actually teach the themes of the book. Actually teach the themes. Okay, um, and then create assignments that are based on those themes. So, for example, when I was teaching ninth grade English, one of my favorite books to teach was a book by Sandro Cisneros called The House on Mango Street. And I wanted to teach this book because I had a lot of students in my class who were Puerto Rican, who were Latino, who were Mexican. And I knew that this book, which is written by a Latino author, okay, Sandra Cisneros, she's talking about themes in the book that relates to their backgrounds, okay? And many of the students understood that and acknowledged that. So one thing that I used to do, and I used to really love teaching this book, is I actually just had the students. So the book is actually written in like these sort of vignettes where like the chapters are very short. And the young girl's name in the book was Esperanza. And so in one of the vignettes, she talks about what her name means. And in Spanish, she said that Esperanza meant like hope or faith or something of the sort, inspiration or something like that. So one of the assignments, I had the students create their own vignettes. And in the book, if one of the vignettes was what is the name of what is the meaning of Esperanza's name, then one of the vignettes that I have for the students to create one of their assignments, hey, tell us about your name. What does your name mean? Okay. And a student may really know the meaning of their name. They can talk about that in the vignette that they create. Or if they said, well, my mother named me this, after a family member or, something of that sort. Well, then the students can share the meaning of their name with the assignments that they create. So that's one way that you can actually incorporate these diverse texts in your classroom, is to actually teach to the themes of the book and actually make it relevant to the students. Another way is another assignment that you can do is that students can actually write letters to the characters in the book. Okay, and this in the letter, the students can say, "This is how I felt after reading this," or "These are the things that I'm thinking about now," or "These are the questions that I have." So in any book, you want to make it real life and relatable to the students and in the context that they are working in. A fourth way, we're on number 4 here with our framework of how to build a culturally responsive classroom. A fourth way is communication. Communication, communication, communication. And this really goes back to building relationships. And I'm going to talk about relationships a little bit more in the last one. But communication is huge with building trust with students and creating a culturally responsive classroom. Many students will say that they may like their teacher, but they feel that their teacher doesn't respect them. And one way that that comes about is through communication. Okay, so as teachers, we want to be mindful of how we communicate to our students. So let me give you a couple of things to think about with communication. One thing with communication is just simply tone of voice. Okay, tone of voice. So how do we speak to our students? Are we speaking to students with this sort of militaristic voice? Are we yelling at them? Are we giving them commands? Okay, how do we speak to our students? I remember when I was growing up, my mother would always say to me, "Carla, watch your tone of voice." Who do you think you're talking to? Okay, so my mother was the boss in that sense. But I just grew up really understanding that the way that we communicate and the tone of voice that we use can really offend people, or can kind of celebrate people or embrace people. So we want to be mindful of that, of our tone of voice. Another thing with communication is when we have to address a student, use words that are inclusive. So, for example, if let's go back to John, okay, earlier, and I was saying that John was using, this vulnerable, excuse me, uh, language that's bad. The word escapes me. Vulgar language. John was using this vulgar language. So as a teacher, if you approach John and you say this, instead of saying, "John, why did you do this?" or you, we may want to change our language and say "we." Okay, John, we had a bad day today. I'm aware of this. We did not have a good day. Some language was used, and all of us felt uncomfortable because of the words that were said. As opposed to saying, "John, you did this, you," which, of course, yes, he did do it, but we want to say, we want to use language that promotes a little bit more of inclusivity. And I think when we use words "we" or "us" or "our," I think that promotes that sort of environment. Another thing is with communication, and I know this may be hard for some of us as educators, but I want you to think about this. If you say something to a student and you felt that it was wrong, perhaps you didn't really say it the correct way, perhaps you acknowledge that you were yelling at a student. There's nothing wrong with apologizing to a student. There is nothing wrong with that. If as a teacher, if you say, perhaps, during your lunchtime and you reflect on a conversation, you say, "You know what, I, you know, maybe I didn't have to approach the student that way. Maybe I was being a bit harsh." Okay, go back and apologize to the student and just say that. I'm not excusing your behavior from earlier, John, but I want to acknowledge the way that I approached it. I know that I was a bit harsh, and I should not have done that. I was wrong. Please accept my apology. Okay. And actually, by apologizing to a student, that's actually another way to build trust and to really build a relationship with the student, because then the student can see that, yes, as a teacher, you're human too. You make mistakes, and that you're big enough to apologize to a student. Okay. I know a lot of teachers don't want to accept that. I know it. But I will encourage you to apologize if necessary. Okay, I don't want you to be apologetic all of the time, and that's not what I'm saying. But if you make a mistake, just simply own up to it and share that with the student. Okay, I always have stories, you all. So we're going to be doing these videos. Okay, I always have a story to say. I remember I was teaching and a young girl, this was in high school, and I'm on the board, writing my notes. And I smelled some nail polish in the classroom. And so I turned around and sure enough, there's a student. She's just back there polishing her nails, just like she's in a nail salon, like we're not in class. And so I got upset, and I'm like, what do you think you're doing? It's a thing, and I'm yelling and all of this. And so afterwards, as the students were going to the next class, she came up to me afterwards and she said, Miss Manning, I understand that I was wrong for polishing my nails, but you didn't have to talk to me like that. That made me feel bad, and I know that I was wrong. I accept that, but I also did not like the way that you spoke to me. And I agreed with her, and I apologized to her. I said, you know what, I was wrong. Both of us were wrong, but you are right. I was a little bit over the top with how I approached you. I could have pulled you to the side. I could have taken some different steps, and I did not do that. And I do apologize to you. So I want to say that to you all, there's a lot of power in apologizing, if the conditions are right for that. Okay. And so the last piece of advice, or the last suggestion that I will have for you in this framework for creating a culturally responsive classroom is to build relationships, not just with the students, but with the parents. Be intentional about building relationships with the parents, okay? Again, especially if you are a white teacher and you have predominantly students of color in your classroom, Black and Latino students, build relationships with those parents. Many of the parents may be working class parents. They may have one job, they may have 2 or 3 jobs that they're trying to juggle. And that can cause some tension because they may not always be available, they may not always be present, but they still want to know that their child is succeeding in your classroom. Regardless of how much money they are making, regardless of what sort of job they have, that does not matter to parents. They still want to know how you are engaging their child, how their child is performing in your class, what's going on. They want to know all of that. And as a teacher, you have a responsibility. As educators, we have responsibilities to communicate and build relationships with our parents, and that is crucial, okay? Many times parents may say, you know what, I only hear from my child's teacher when my child is misbehaving. I only get a phone call from the school when my child gets in trouble. It should not be like that. As an educator, we need to call home and say, you know what, I want to call and say that Carla had a really good day today. Sometimes she is talkative and, she can talk back and everything. But today she had a really good day. She came prepared for class. She was responsive during the discussions. She did well on her quiz today. And I really want to applaud that and celebrate that. And I just wanted to let you know that as the teacher of your child, there's nothing wrong with that. That takes 5 minutes to call home or to send an email and to give a good report of how your child of how this child is performing in the class. Another way to build a relationship with the parent is to ask them for their, the best ways to communicate to them. Whether that's email, whether that's text, or what have you, whether they are comfortable with sending, physical documents home, a newsletter or something like that. Just simply ask them what are some ways that you can stay in contact with them throughout the year, and then actually be consistent with that. If you're saying that you're going to communicate to the parents every week or every 2 weeks, then as an educator, follow through with your word on that. Okay. So again, to recap, okay, we are thinking about here how to create a culturally responsive classroom with our students, particularly with students who come from racially diverse identities. Okay, so students who are Latino, students who are Black, and I'm going to tell you something. Even within those cultures, when we say Latino is a lot of different identities, and all of those are there. That's another conversation that we need to have, you all. Okay, because we like to just group Latinos all in just one. But Mexico is different from Puerto Rico, and that's different from Colombia, and that's different from Brazil. Okay, every student, just because they speak Spanish, that doesn't mean that they have that's different from Panama. All of that. That doesn't mean that their cultures and their ways of living are the same. Okay, we need to break that down and tease that out. Spanish really might be the only thing that's linking students. But other than that, when students come from different countries, we just say Latino, we just group all of that. That's not true. That's not true. And I had to learn that. I'm just going to be honest with you. I had to also learn that. Okay. But that's another conversation we can have, guys. Okay. Okay. So again, how to build a culturally responsive classroom. And I just came up with 5 for today, but it can really be 10. It can really be 20 because there's so many things to think about. So we can really have a part 2 to this conversation as well. But I'll just recap. So 1, rethink our classroom management practices and philosophies, and rethink our classroom management with restorative justice at the center. Okay, restorative practices at the center. The second way is to create community with our students. And a good way to create community is to build trust with our students. Okay, build trust, build those authentic, trusting relationships. A third aspect is to think about teaching literacy and teaching diverse texts in ways that promotes more of a real life context for the students. So teach the books in ways that are engaging with the students' interests and backgrounds. A fourth way is communication. Okay, we want to think about how we are communicating with our students, and does our communication promote respect and value? Okay. And then the last aspect is to build relationships with our parents. Okay, build communication systems with our parents so that we are consistently having these empowering conversations and learning what we need to learn. Okay. So that is my framework for today, you all, on how to build a culturally responsive classroom. I am glad to be here. I'm glad to share this information. I really hope that this conversation is enlightening and empowering, and I hope that you were able to take away from this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those useful tips. I can really appreciate, what I appreciate the most about them is that they're all kind of intertwined. Like we can't really have one without the other, right? So how we build that trust and communicate, we build trust through the relationships and the communication with students and parents. And then we use that to make those restorative practices easier. So those restorative practices, I wanted to make the point that those are hard to teachers that haven't built those authentic relationships with students. You can't, talk to kids any old way and make them feel devalued and then expect them to feel safe enough to go in front of their peers and express their feelings and say and express what they were feeling and why they acted that way. They're not going to want to do that if they feel like this is not a safe, inclusive environment. So I think those points right there are really important to note that you can't have one without the other. That it will come across inauthentic. If you even especially if you try to tell a parent, well, I tried to have John come to the classroom or have a conversation, but he wasn't having it because. And then if the teacher knows that you haven't built a relationship, the mother or dad knows that you haven't built a relationship, then they're going to come back with like, well, how do you expect him to do that? Like, look at how he feels when he's in your classroom, and they'll be definitely, in the right mindset, and they'd be totally justified in saying that. And I also really like the fact that these approaches not only target our our Black and Latino students, but they also shift the mindset of our white students and how we approach our Black and Hispanic students, and kind of make it to where like we all are included in this classroom. We are going to listen to this person's point of view. They're valued. And I think what happens when we throw we resort to throwing our kids out of the classroom, we don't realize that it gives the other students like this mindset like, oh, that's a bad kid. Oh, that kid is, he's a troublemaker. And then now that student is ostracized for being a troublemaker. And now that student further feels like they're not a part of the learning community that you're working hard to establish in your classroom. So it's really like a vicious cycle. I read an article recently that I shared in the group that said the same system that educated George Floyd educated the cop that killed him. So it's like how we're responding to our students. It's definitely going to educate white students on how to respond to other races and other cultures. So thank you for making those really good points, because I feel like that's definitely, those points are all important for us to consider when we're trying to make a change and adjust our practices to be more equitable.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, thank you. And the one thing I wanted to point out with this framework, which I think is really intentional, is how, and Dr. Manning described it really well, is how can we start to take all of this information that our group has thrown together and compiled, and we've read, and we've scanned different things, and we've done reading, and we've watched videos, and we've reflected, but how are we going to start framing that content, that information, so that we actually make impactful change when we start back in the fall? And obviously that's going to look still, different because of the virus, but still all of these frameworks can be implemented. They just need to be tweaked. But the consensus here is that this will work, and it will frame your mindset so that you feel like you're actually making impactful changes. So really start to think on this framework and say, what can I kind of do? What are some examples that I can, and initiatives that I can do within each of these frameworks, which Dr. Manning gave some really great examples. So this is just the first of many videos that we want to create for you for our Educators for Equity group. And we definitely look forward to continuing this conversation with Dr. Manning, and we thank her for her time today from all of us Educators for Equity, and work towards the state starts for the new school year. So thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.